Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of On the Hook, the official podcast of Yellow Pike Media. My name is Rick, and today I'll be joined by Justin Lee. He's an amazing actor. You may remember him from his roles in Arrested Development and quite a few other television shows that we'll talk about. He's also recently been part of a game release. If you've checked out the amazing game Rise of the Ronin, he does voice acting and motion capture in that. And he's got a few other things going on, a little MMA and a new project he's working on we'll talk to him about. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate, from your list of things, you're a very busy guy.
I try to stay busy, but it's my pleasure to be here. This is really exciting. So thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and your journey into the crazy world of Hollywood, video games, and how that ended up in an MMA fighter kind of position. Let's start with the early years. How did you first get into acting?
I think how this starts is I was always a very curious person. I'm somewhat pretty excitable. I guess you could say from a young age I had a pretty addictive personality in the sense that if there was something I was really interested in, I'd just fully embed myself. And that was kind of an issue because I had just way too many interests as a kid. And I was just like curious about everything. So my parents had to really try to limit what they brought around me. It's I can be fascinated by woodwork. You show me a video on woodwork and I might get lost in doing craftsmanship and things like that, and doing carpentry. And yeah, so it started at a young age where it's really I just kind of wanted to do everything. Eventually, once you get a little bit older, you have a kind of a better understanding of like movies and television shows, and you're like, oh, this isn't actually real. These are people acting. And then suddenly you see actors and that your favorite actors in other roles, and in a way you're like, wait a second. So this is kind of like the trick to being able to do all these different things is kind of be an actor. That's what I was thinking. And then when you look at some people's process, or at least my personal process is when I'm looking at a specific role, again, I try to embed myself and do as much research as possible, to try to be as authentic as possible. And so it was kind of like what stood out to me. That being said, for anyone out there that has immigrant parents, my parents are from South Korea. They're pretty strict about me going the academic route.
Sure, very much.
And so this is always like I always get a lot of people in the Asian community asking like, how'd you convince your parents? Like that just seems like the hardest part just to begin with. For most people, the question is like, how'd you get into Hollywood? For me, it was like,
Right.
oh, I had to convince my parents
So,
first.
so, so a little pro tip for those who are wondering: how did you convince your parents?
Oh, I kind of tricked them in a way. So like I've been wanting to go to acting classes left and right since I was a little kid. But my parents had gotten scammed like with my older brother. And
Mm.
this was like what, early 90s, pre when internet is prominent. And so there was just no, it was a lot more challenging than it is now to figure out who the scammers were.
Right.
So my parents had a bad taste in their mouth, and I was just like, come on, let me go to an acting class, let me give this a shot. I got really lucky where one of my neighbors was actually doing like commercial and print work. So I brought out my notepad, went to his mom, and just started like drilling her a bunch of questions, asking how he got started, and kind of trying to create like a roadmap for myself. And then I took it to my parents. I was like, look, he actually did it. This was my neighbor, Michael Childs. He actually did it. And there's an acting school down the street from us in Orange County, which was rare in and of itself. Most of them you had to go all the way up to LA, which for those of you that aren't here, on this side of the states, traffic was still bad then. So it's like you're talking like an hour and a half drive, sometimes 2 hours just to go one way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously my parents wouldn't want to do that. So this was like convenient that it was there. And I got lucky because the owner of that acting studio, her son was an actor. And so she also didn't want to go all the way up to LA. So
Mhm.
she was kind of like, why don't I do this here and bring the casting directors and bring people in the industry down this way. So I told my mom, I was like, hey, it's about to be my birthday, like for my
Sure.
11th or 12th birthday, maybe it was 12th birthday or something. I think it was 12th. I was like, please just let me take this acting class. That's all I want. Just let me take this acting class. So I went, and it's like I think you paid for like a 3 week package. And we bought two of those packages. But by the second month, and again, this was not common for most acting schools. A lot of acting schools, like the way you keep in business, unfortunately for some of these, it's counterintuitive, is to keep the actors around,
Right.
and keep the classes going. Whereas some are really trying to get you back, get you out into working. And so there, she was really honest. She didn't string me along. She told my mom, like, I think he can actually get an agent right now. I'd be willing to do a showcase and bring five agents down. And this was a good friend of mine, Sean Michael, um, Sean Afable. And so they brought five agents down. And the interesting thing was, I think about it now, I'm like, there was only two of us at the showcase auditioning.
Really?
So like there's no way they made any money. It was like the money that the two actors put in was probably just enough to bring the agents down. So it
Right.
was different back then. I'm not sure if you can even do things like that now. But back then, there were five agents, legitimate agents. I would say like top 20, top 30 agents, and did the showcase for them. And I got a call later that day that all five wanted to meet and sign me. And so it was like one of those things where like my
So,
parents were like,
so
all right,
mom
well,
kind of had to acquiesce at that point, right? I'm sure the
yeah,
thought process going in is like, it's 6 weeks, he'll get over it and move on to the next thing. Let's
yeah,
indulge. And then you were actually a desired
yeah.
commodity, right?
And then it happened real quick, and they were just like you just said, they were thinking what nothing was going to come of it. A
Right.
month later, I'm on a commercial set. So this was like within 6 months I started working, and I was doing something for Disney and the Lion King reboot or something. But yeah, and they kind of just had to run with it at that point. And suddenly, them not wanting to go to LA for acting schools was like now they didn't have a choice. Now, like for the next few years, they had to kind of deal with it and drive me up and down for
Oh,
auditions.
wow. See, sometimes it backfires on them and you get where you want to be. And I'm sure they're incredibly proud of you now. And there's
Yeah,
not as much talk about going the academic route. Or do you still get the occasional, it's not too late?
that's what I told them.
Really?
I told them, I was like, look, college, there's no expiration date.
Fair.
If you can pay and you can get in, they'll take you anytime. Maybe this isn't the best advice that some parents want their kids to hear. But the other thing that I told them was part of the deal was for me to continue acting was I had to keep my academics up. So I was still a very good student. I wanted to do so many different extracurricular activities, and it was a challenge because I was on set all the time, and it's a commitment when you do like sports and things like that. It's not fair to the team if you're not around, and so um, in a way, acting was my extracurricular, or really sometimes it felt like school was my extracurricular, and I was on set all the time. But it was one of those things where once I got my acceptance letters to college, my parents thought I was going to go get a degree in like film school or something. And long story short, when we were supposed to go to dinner, I was supposed to tell them where I was going to go. Basically told them I'm not. And I was like, I started a production company. I'm working. I think this is what you go to school for. And school's amazing. I actually turned them down twice. I got my acceptance letters out of high school and told my parents, like, don't worry, I'm just gonna go to JC for a couple of years, save my money. They'll accept me again. So I did that. They're like, this is weird. Who does that? So I got my acceptance letters the second time, and that's when I turned them down again. And they were so sad, and I just had to tell them, like, look, I'm extremely grateful. I'm very lucky. I think you did the best job you could raising me, the absolute best job you could. And I think you did a good job. Like, wouldn't you say so yourself? What parent's going to say no?
Right. It's
And
like,
so
no,
they
as a
said
terrible
yes.
parent,
And I was
that's not
like,
gonna
well,
happen.
yeah. And so you turn it around and you tell them, well, no, don't you think you should trust your work? Just give me
right?
a chance. Give me like 3, 4 years. Let's see what happens.
You taught me to be the best version of me I can be. Now let me go be me.
Yeah.
That was a very clever approach. You're right. It's really hard for a parent to say no. No, no, I'm a terrible parent. So in thinking about all that and kind of looking at over here at IMDb, the source of all knowledge, they're never wrong. And looking at your credit list, it's I think everybody immediately thinks Arrested Development, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm looking at your list, and it's like you have been so fortunate to end up in really well-known great shows: The Bernie Mac Show, Shameless, a few lesser ones, 10 Things I Hate About You, which was still a good show, I thought, but it was all right. And then Arrested Development comes along. How did that happen? How did you end up in that role on that set, and what was that experience like?
I feel like I'm one of those, like you said, fortunate people, where I've kind of got thrown in at such a high level of production.
Mhm.
Um, Arrested Development was really like my first job that I booked. I hit a couple commercials, and then after that, my first scripted job was Arrested Development shortly after. I would say within the first year, and that was incredible. I got really lucky because I was on so many high level sets that it wasn't until when I got older and you take a little risks to do indie projects
Sure.
to get certain roles and to flex your creativity. And you really appreciate what it's like to work with professionals at the highest level. I mean, Arrested Development was like a crash course in that. Like everyone is on their A game. It was like being part of an all-star championship team, and you
Sure.
don't realize how good you have it until you get traded to like a smaller market team. And you're like, ah, okay.
Wow.
Pros and cons though, right? Pros and cons.
This is not the same thing. It
Yeah.
says it's the same, but it's not the same.
Yeah, at the time I didn't realize how big. I don't think, well, I don't know if a lot of us did, but I didn't realize how big the show was going to be. These are all really A-list actors now, but at the time, like they weren't. And
Sure.
like Tony Hale, who plays Buster, my stepbrother, like he was doing like all these commercials. He was mainly predominantly doing commercials at that time. And so that was kind of his big break too. It was a big break for a lot of people. It catapulted a lot of careers. So I didn't realize like how impactful this show would be
Mhm.
at the time. So it's phenomenal to look back at it.
Speaking of impact and how big it really became, you pretty much have your own fandom as a result. Yeah? What is that like? I mean, people have tattoos in places, you know? What was that experience like?
Yeah, tattoo's a commitment.
Yeah.
It's it's shocking. Also in a weird way complimentary.
Sure.
Like I'm grateful for it. Uh, but it's just like it. I mean, the tattoo thing was probably the most shocking. I was like, did someone really tattoo Anya on themselves?
Yep.
I mean, what it shows me is Arrested Development has probably to this day some of the most loyal, diehard fans. It's almost like that if you know, you know crowd.
Mm.
Because in the beginning, it was like the fans of this show were kind of ahead of mainstream culture's appetite for what comedy was like. I mean, not having laugh tracks and things. It set a precedent for how sitcoms and shows could be shot and produced. So it was, yeah, it's pretty cool to see. Like, I mean, I've also seen people name their dogs like Annyong and Buster. That to me is great. I'm a dog
Which
person.
makes you feel better, the naming the dog after your character or getting your face tattooed on their body?
I mean, I'd say naming the dog.
Seems a little less permanent and intimidating, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. I got a soft spot for dogs too.
There you go. No, it's such a thing, and it's funny you mentioned, the future of comedy and the sitcom without a laugh track. I watched something the other day. brand new sitcom on one of the broadcast networks. I don't even remember which one. And like 2 minutes in, there's a laugh track. I'm like, right? It was almost jarring because most of the comedic shows I watch don't have them anymore, right? They're more like Arrested Development than like the 70s and 80s show or things like that. So it was really jarring, and it kind of showed just how much that show had influenced television to the point where when they try to go back, it's very, very jarring. It seems out of place and disingenuous and artificial. It was
Yeah, totally. It kind of reminds me of like if you go back and watch standard definition after watching HD and you're like, oh my gosh, we thought this was so crisp.
right.
Like this was the best we've ever seen back then. And you don't realize like, oh, wait a second.
So how did this? I mean, this is a big first job, right? Sort of impact your attitudes and outlook on being an actor. How did that shape moving through all of the other jobs you've had?
Um, I think for me, it made me very picky, very selective. I feel like I'm a little different from a lot of actors that start as children. I would say 12 is still a child for sure. Um, and that's most of the time it's your parents putting you into it. So sometimes it's
Right.
their dream. For me, it was quite the opposite, right? And so I very much always got into this for the craft of it, for the enjoyment, almost for my therapy in a way, just like anyone's hobby, right? And for a lot of that reason, I don't really even watch the work that I do, or I would never really watch it, just because I didn't really feel like that was my part, and that always felt the most uncomfortable to me. For me, the
Can you
most
watch
fun part.
now?
Yeah, I can watch now, and I think I can objectively watch now as at being older, so that I can gain things from it and learn things from it. But at a young age, it that wasn't why I was doing it. I was doing it for the moment of being in production. Like I just loved being on set. I loved creating and being a character. And so with that, I think it made me very particular to what types of roles I wanted to go out for after that, which can make it a little bit challenging. I was early on the scene for Asian actors in
Mhm.
Hollywood, and so this was before the diversity movement had really come in and played a part, and so there wasn't a lot of roles for me to begin with. Um, I mean, funny story about Arrested Development is Annyong was supposed to be an 18-year-old over 18, and I didn't even realize that because I was at and I look back at it now. When I was at the audition room, everyone was an adult. I was the only child there. Me and Sean actually were the only child there, children there. And so, but I didn't put two and two together until later on. That's why one of the jokes in the show is that he's actually 18, right? Lucille puts the
Right.
money in his trust account, but he can actually pull it out. And so for them, they realized like they thought it was more funny that I didn't look 18. And so they're like, you know what? Screw it. Keep the script the same. Let's go with this younger kid.
Ceremony. Oh, no. And I don't need the other soccer moms knowing how old my first batch of kids are.
Yeah, I think that they're gonna know that Anyang's not. Would somebody please tell this insufferable child?
Sure.
Um, and so it was different. It was very different. And so for me, I think if that happened, and this is with no resentment, I think if that happened, if I had that job now as a 15, 16, 17-year old, with the amount of roles that are available, I would likely have offers be coming in left and right. At that time, it was just beginning, right? So I
Right.
remember like the diversity movement was just beginning. I would go out, for example, I would go out for an audition for Wizards of Waverly Place, which is a famous Disney show with Selena Gomez, and I was auditioning for the role of her brother. But I remember looking on the casting sheet, and I'm like, "There's no Asian parents here. There's no one even auditioning for who could be my parents. I can't be adopted for every show." And so I quickly needed to find something to fill me in the meantime so that I wouldn't be just taking roles that I felt like weren't fulfilling my creativity. And so that's where martial arts jumped in. That's where MMA jumped in. And once again, MMA at that time was very frowned upon. People forget because it's a mainstream sport now. It's on ESPN.
Right.
There are free fights everywhere. But when I was doing it, my agents were telling me like, "Hey, don't really put this on your resume. Can you call this something out? Can you like diversify your martial arts? Like list them as specific martial arts and not as mixed martial arts."
Right.
And so that it was very interesting. At that time, I think like Senator McCain was trying to shut it down.
It had a
I was
very
having to go
bad
to
reputation. Yeah.
yeah,
It was almost like, I think I remember it being portrayed on some news shows as it was like somewhere like, in that Fight Club clandestine, we don't talk about it kind of thing. And
yeah,
it's rogue and it's, there's no rules, which of course was never true. But
yeah,
it definitely had that, we need to shut this down because it's no good. It's bad for our youth.
yeah,
Kind of thing.
yeah. And so, we would have to go to Indian reservations at that time to fight, or where I was, a lot of us would have to go down to Mexico, south of the border, to get some fights there, or you'd just go into illegal smoker fights, which is what they would call it back in the day, amateur smoker fights, where you're not getting paid, so
Right.
it's a kind of a gray area.
Wow. So how long did you? I don't even know what to say. It's like now it kind of does sound like what John McCain was selling, right? It's like, oh, they were kind of backroom fights that nobody talked about. What is it like looking back on that now and seeing where MMA has gone? Do you wish, and maybe you are, I don't know. Do you wish you were still in that game?
Probably not. I think, again, hindsight and pros and cons to everything, and you got to appreciate the way your cards come out. And like for me, you could look at it one way where you're like, oh my gosh, there wasn't any money in it back when I was doing it. If I was doing it now, look how much money would be in it now.
Right.
But that could also have been very detrimental to my health.
Sure.
So but maybe we would have trained smarter now because the sport is more matured. So there's more sport specific training. Back when I was training, we were just fighting in the gym, going very hard.
Right.
We didn't really understand the repercussions of concussions and repeated head trauma and subconcussion hits. And like for example, I grew up with I was born with a photographic memory. That was very helpful for me in acting because
Sure.
I couldn't forget a line. I couldn't forget a script. I couldn't forget someone's phone number if I had tried. Um, After getting hit in the head repeated amounts of times, I slowly started seeing that slip away.
Really?
Yeah, and then it completely went away. And then I had some things I had to recover from and overcome with challenges from concussions and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, it was very interesting. That actually forced me to have to entirely change my acting process as well, because everyone learns a certain way, right? So if
Right.
you don't have a good memory, that's fine because you have all throughout your childhood to figure out your best practices or best skills or your ways to memorize things. But you've had your whole life to do it, right? If suddenly you're 20 years old and you've been used to just remembering everything, now that gets taken away. You don't you don't have the SOPs.
Right.
You don't
You don't
realize
have
you got to
anything to
write
fall
things
back on.
down. Yeah, you don't have the habit of doing these things. So for me, that actually ended up being really challenging in the beginning because it was like trying to learn a new side of my brain of how it
Mhm.
operates. But I felt like it helped me get deeper into the craft because now, in order for me to remember the lines, I had to really remember the emotion and the feeling of it. Um, and that was
So
the
that you
only
could pull
way I
both
could
back.
actually. Yeah, yeah. So it was before, it was like, I think it gave me a deeper understanding of the emotion of the craft.
So let's go back to acting for a minute, and since you've so nicely tied them together for me. Um, you did a little, I'm going to use the phrase groundbreaking show called Artificial. Won Twitch its first ever Emmy. What was that like? How did that come about? What was your experience with that? And I'm going to assume you're really proud of that work considering the award.
Yeah, um, extremely proud. Again, it was one of those things where it caught my eye because of the innovation. the creativity. I like when we do things that haven't been done before. It's very fun. It's exciting, but because of that, you don't really know what's going to come of it, right? And this was one of those things that became that surprise too, where we knew we were doing something really cool and groundbreaking, but we didn't know we were going to get or I didn't know we were going to get an Emmy for it and things like that. And um, I came into the show into the second season. I knew actors that were working on the show, and I was doing some podcasting at the time, so I had some experience podcasting, and there was a role for me on there. So I got lucky. This was, uh, thank you, Bernie Sue. This was one of the projects that I didn't have to audition for. It was a role that was written for me, and it was done in a very meta way, right? Where we used all of our same names. We
Right.
ran the podcast as if so there's the scripted show and that we're in, and then there's the scripted podcast that's analyzing the show as if it's not scripted.
Right.
So it's very, very meta. And then we're running the show live stream as well, which almost gave it like a theater aspect because it's like you get one take at this, and it's
Yeah.
like an hour, sometimes hour and a half long show, um, while trying to make this work through the pandemic. Um,
Not
very,
challenging at
very
all.
very challenging. I mean, look, I had the easier part. This was logistically insane for the production team. So I mean,
Sure.
really a huge kudos and shout out to them. But also how quickly things need to turn around on a show like this. On a movie set or a TV show, it's fast, but you have a little more time. But when things are instant,
Right.
right away, you don't even have a week ahead of time, right? You know, like with TV, you could at least be like a week or two before the releases. But with this, it was almost like we were riding to the moment.
Yeah.
This actually in a way reminded me of Arrested Development, where they were riding to the moment we were about to call action on day one
Oh my
for the
God.
week.
It it's almost now knowing that it was almost like you go way back. You go back to like the old time radio shows where they were reading it live on air off the page in front of them, and you couldn't stop. You couldn't go back. There was no retake. I don't even know if most of the earliest ones rolled tape on them, so there's no record of them. But you get
Yeah,
one shot right now and just keep going.
yeah, it was really cool. I mean, it was all in one location in a house in the Hollywood Hills, and the set was in one location, and all of our like the podcast rooms was in another location, in another room in the same location. But it was interesting. It was really, really interesting, and it was the first Emmys I got to go to. I
Right.
didn't go to any of the Emmys with Arrested Development, but I did go with Artificial, and that was just like an incredible experience. They always rave about the after party, the governor's ball.
Right.
And I'm a foodie, and so I
Uh-oh.
will say the food is
Heaven.
on par.
So the next logical step is for you to start your own business, right? After having all these other successes, why not? You
Yeah, yeah, I guess you're right. I
you've
actually
started
started with
production companies, right?
yeah, I started a production company. That's actually why I told my parents I'm not going to go to college. I was like, I got this company right now. I got to focus on. Um, and actually, during this time, I was telling you I was having to recover from a lot of concussions, a lot of
Mhm.
injuries. I almost didn't retire by choice. It was kind of like by force. I mean, I had torn both my labrums, I'd torn both my knees. Eventually, I'd ruptured my Achilles, I'd broken ribs, tore my abdomen. I mean, you name it. I fractured my nose 3 times, lost a tooth. It was all like just the physical damage. That wasn't enough to make me retire because it's that much fun. But
You
but I
you
will
make it
say,
sound like so much fun. Yeah,
yeah, it's that much fun. It must be addicting if you keep going back.
sure.
That or I'd probably have a screw loose. Um, but it was really challenging. It was the concussions that made me stop because there was a point where I was bedridden and like my hands and feet were getting numb.
Mm.
Um, My endocrine system was getting damaged from the head trauma. And I remember I was having so much light sensitivity that in the worst of it, I would have to be in bed for like a week. And all I would be staring at would be this red light on my smoke alarm. And that was enough light to just give me a piercing headache. So that's when I realized I was like in the mornings, I was having plantar fasciitis in both my feet. So it was like in the morning, I would crawl to the tub and turn on the hot water to warm my feet up,
Mm.
just to get going. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this means my time has come,
Probably
and I
shouldn't
got
do
to
that
focus
anymore.
on recovery and health. And I think part of what made that a challenge was at the time, the medical system was just pumping out pharmaceutical drugs. Anytime you went to the doctor, which was like you're supposed to go if you have an injury or something, it was like during that time they were just giving you opioids. They were just feeding you opioids. I think the first time they were giving me Norcos or Vicodin, I was 16 years old. And so you don't realize what you're taking. You just trust the doctor at that time,
Yeah.
right? And so,
And
I
you
was
felt
taking
better,
these.
obviously.
Yeah, I mean,
So
they do
clearly the
make you
doctor
feel
was
better,
right.
right? Yeah,
Mhm.
but it all, I believe, exacerbated the injuries and
Right.
significantly compounded them because you're not attacking the root of it. You're just numbing it, and you're making it worse. You're wearing and tearing it down greater. And so for me, that's when I turned to a more holistic route. I turned to plant medicine. Cannabis for me was extremely helpful. I know there's a ton of stigma that's come around that, and there's also been a lot of developments that's come around that too. Um, but that for me was just like it had helped me so much with the use of like CBD, with the use of like higher dose concentrates as well, with the benefits of terpenes and flavonoids and things like this. And while I was understanding, learning more about plant medicine like curcumin, the benefits of turmeric and things like that, what we found that was beneficial for that were the flavonoids and terpenes in there, which are the same things that I found were found in cannabis. And so it was very interesting because I had to very much hide this from the entertainment world, especially being a younger
Mhm.
actor still going out for younger roles. At that time, it wasn't legal, so I had to legalization had not. Hey, it was medically legal, so I had my medical license,
Mm.
but it was still frowned upon. It wasn't looked at as the way it was now, and you were concerned that you could get. Sounds crazy to say, but you could get blacklisted for a plant. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it was quite interesting, especially being a younger actor that could still go
Sure.
on Nickelodeon
Because
roles
you're
or
supposed
Disney
to be this
roles.
role model and setting an
Right,
example and, "Oh,
right,
yeah,
right.
but
And then
here's
endorsements
TNT with
come
the
to
snap of
play.
you." Yeah.
Exactly. And so, that was something that I always had to kind of like hide. And eventually, once legalization came to be, I had a friend that was working for a CBD wellness company that was utilizing tinctures and Ayurvedic recipes, which are actually like recipes and ingredients with using plants and herbs that actually come from India and from like the Eastern Asian world and things like that.
Mhm.
Things that we've now tested and researched, like blends of curcumin, turmeric, and black pepper together. Um, and so it really fascinated me. They needed someone to help them on the creative director side. So I went in and started working over there and doing content and things like that, production work over there. And long story short, I decided that I wanted to start a cannabis company of my own, something that really fell in line with my ethos and my values, what I believed in. Part of rehabilitating my body and getting it back to a baseline that I'm at now was making a whole lifestyle choice of a difference. So, getting back to what I'm eating, what I'm putting into my body, what my nutritional levels were at, what my hormone levels were at, I would say I probably put in about like $50,000 into this to figure out like how to fix my body, and part of that included regenerative medicine, which was stem cells. I was shooting some documentary stuff on stem cells and did a podcast with some stem cell doctors, and under patient funded research started doing something with SVS stem cell therapy, which is you take the stem cells from your fat layer, and so they're a genetic match to you. What happens when we get older is we develop more fat, and they actually become dormant on our fat cells. So you can pull them out and reactivate them. And I've actually been storing them cryogenically in a cell bank because it did so much amazing work for me that they took some of the cells, put it into the cell bank, and they harvest and proliferate it, keeping it going annually for me. So now, whenever I'm having any, I feel like I need like a re-up, or so I'm not recovering as fast. For example, if I would train before the stem cells and before all my holistic approaches, all the vitamins and nutraceuticals, if I would train, I'd be even more sore week 2. Like I was just not recovering. It would feel like I was in a car accident or a train wreck. It would feel terrible. And then I would do the stem cells, and lo and behold, I was recovering normally, like everyone else, 1, 2, 3 days. And it was like I was having my life back again, you know? And
The
so,
delayed recovery was because of all the damage from MMA fighting and the injuries you sustained.
yeah, the damage, the injuries, and I also think not taking proper care, not doing the proper diet. Yeah, I mean, food is medicine as well,
Sure.
right? Food is definitely medicine, and for me, it was getting my diet cleaner, understanding that I needed to go organic or I need to go grass fed, all these things, and now understanding that there's a whole level above organic, right? I mean, there's regenerative agriculture is a huge thing. It's really, really big right now, and it's growing, and we're seeing that it's like eggs, right? There was cage free,
Yep.
then now there's like pasture raised, and we're realizing like there's a
The
whole nother
free
level to this.
range.
Yeah, yeah. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, if I'm eating clean and this is really important, well, then I need to make sure the cannabis I'm consuming is equally clean as well. Because that's also plant, that's also agriculture. So I decided that whatever cannabis I use, I'll only work with sun grown, fully regenerative farmed, agricultured cannabis. Things that are using compost, things that are not reaping the soil of the minerals, but having sustainable practices that are feeding the soil and thus enriching the soil and the land, and thus producing greater harvests year after year, which then produces better nutritional benefits for us and our body. I just anecdotally for myself, I can say I see such a big difference in consuming regenerative farmed agriculture even versus organic agriculture. So it's been incredible, and that was kind of the ethos I wanted to take with the cannabis brand I started, Papi Co.
Really, iPoppy is the name.
Yeah.
All right, we could be friends. One of the because you mentioned it, you started when it wasn't legal. Right now, that industry is it's in a strange place, wouldn't you say? It's
Yes.
legal, sort of some places, and it's still. I'll just say not legal. I won't say illegal. I'll say not legal. Technically, everywhere under federal law.
Yeah.
Like there was a conversation I was having with someone the other day where, if I were to go, I live in Massachusetts, it's legal. I'm right on the border of Rhode Island, it's legal. But if I buy in Massachusetts and go to a party at a friend's house in Rhode Island, I've committed a federal crime of drug trafficking.
Yeah.
As
Transporting.
a company, how do you navigate that? The fact that how you move it, and I'm sure the federal banking laws haven't changed to accommodate the industry.
It's very, very challenging. I mean, just on the regulation side, I think we're one of the most regulated businesses
Sure.
ever, which makes it a challenge as well. There's a ton of bureaucracy involved. But I mean, to answer the first part of that is we stay in California. We're a California business. We're legal in California. Like you said, you can't, which is kind of dumb because California has the ability to supply all of the United States if it could become federally legal. And so, we are awaiting that moment, and we are putting plans in place and getting ready for when that does happen. But in the meantime, we've got to stick to the regulations and stay within our jurisdiction, which is within California. And that it's just the way it is, unfortunately. But at the same time, things are changing every year. There's more states going legal, and every year there's more states adding medical. I think even Austin in Texas has some type of medical program for cannabis. So that's a huge step in the right direction. If you're seeing kind of the history of how Texas usually looked at these things. But I think it's inevitable. I think eventually it takes time, but I do think eventually this will all become legal. And some of the challenges just within California is the oversaturation. I mean, there's so many brands now. But this is where I think we set ourselves apart is I think 99% of the brands in the market are commercial brands. I think there's very few craft brands. We are very much a craft brand focused on craft quality. The farmers that we work with are all small legacy craft farmers. Um, we always say that we're pheno hunters and storytellers. Pheno hunting meaning we're trying to source and find and work with our farmers to breed the best genetics possible that are all exotic and rare. A lot of these that you can only find from one farm that are exclusive to their genetics, which is very different from if you go into the dispensary, you'll look at a bunch of different brands that have all the same flavors or the same strains. And so we take a very different approach. And for us, I feel like the farmer is the story and they are the product. So we really try to champion that farmer, right? Really try to tell their story. And the product that we release is really just, in a way, a gateway or an opportunity to kind of experience that community. And, all these farmers have just incredible, phenomenal stories that are just like, they could all be movies. They could all be their own movies. It's just incredible.
It sounds a lot like what happened to the beer industry at one point. All these craft brewers came along. Of course, they all ended up getting bought out by the major breweries, but it sounds very similar to that start with craft beers. We're
Well, I
almost out
actually,
of
sorry to cut you off. I actually think Boston Beer Company is doing things with cannabis now, with the terpenes
are
and
they?
stuff. Yeah, I know someone that's in charge of that department over there with them. He's over on that side, and he did the Ganja program with me, which is a sommelier program for cannabis. But it is really interesting because at the end of the day, hops, terpenes, these are all very similar things,
Sure.
profiles and tastes. Yeah, sensory profiles.
It's interesting that one of our, depending on how you look at alcohol in general, one of our vices is originally, when you think of the origin of most distilled beverages, they come from some very carefully grown and bred organics, right? You have hops, you have barley, you have wheat, sugarcane, all of these things. And for some reason, we got away from that, went to synthetics and artificials, and now we're kind of drifting back the other way. So
Yeah.
overall, I feel like that's a positive.
I would say, and you hit it on the nail. Cannabis right now, most of them are ingrown or are grown indoor. Sorry, are grown indoor, which is not the most sustainable practice. It actually ends up increasing their cogs, which is why the market's kind of been deceived to grade cannabis with their eyes and not with the rest of their sensory profiles. And so a lot of these companies are using nutrients or chemical nutrients and things like that, which then requires them to flush them out, which is, if you're needing to flush them out, it's because they're dangerous to consume. But a
Yeah.
lot of these, yeah, a lot of these brands that are out right now are pretty much not organic, are not using regenerative grown cannabis, and so I feel like that's kind of antithetical to plant medicine. And I think that's, me personally. I think a lot of times when you look at these studies that are done with cannabis from back in the day, I don't think a lot of them are even done with regenerative farm cannabis. I think these are done with cannabis that are likely using pesticides or chemical nutrients and things like that. And if you're eating a fruit that has mold or pesticides or a chemical nutrient, you're not going to blame the fruit for being unhealthy. You're going to blame the things that are added to it. And I think, as again, as the stigma reduces and as regulations ease and things become more and more legal, we're going to have more research funding. And I think we can control a little bit more of these research findings to give us more accurate data.
It's definitely an interesting, both from just a pure farming standpoint. I grew up in a very rural part of deep South Florida, and I had friends that, grew potatoes for Lay's potato chips, things like that.
That's cool.
So it's interesting to hear that piece of it. But it's also interesting to think about, all the logistics and then legalistics. Can we make up a word? All the legal things going around, that have to be resolved before it can become the industry that it eventually will, I think, in my opinion. That said, we're almost out of time, and I really feel I would be completely remiss if I didn't say congratulations on the rise of the Ronin and its
Thank you.
release a few months ago. You did some VO work on that. You did mocap on that too.
It wasn't mocap, it was PCAP for that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was mostly like the facial recognition. They put the markers on my face
Right.
and things like that. Yeah.
Kind of like when you see Benedict Cumberbatch doing Smaug with the dots on his face. And
Exactly.
although you didn't do the whole thing where like he did, where he's crawling around on the floor doing embodying.
No, I didn't have to go into
Smaug.
the bodysuit. Yeah,
No?
I didn't have to go into the bodysuit. I had the markers on my face, and I was in a sound studio, in the small studio room. So there's again, pros and cons there. I wouldn't say cons, but there's challenges and things that are easier for both, like mocap versus PCAP, right? So
Right.
like mocap is can be exhausting. It can be
Sure, it's
draining. It's
very
a lot.
physical, right? You're jumping.
Yeah.
you're-
Yeah, but in a way, I feel like it's easier for you to give your best vocal performance, or for lack of a better word, give your best performance because you're fully invested into it.
Right.
You've got your whole body involved. You've got everything involved. You're in a bigger environment. Whereas PCAP, not as exhausting, but sometimes you really need to work to get the same level of intensity out.
Sure.
And even in that small room, you've got to like move around and do what you can to continue to have the integrity of that moment.
It's about bringing, in voice acting, it's about bringing the emotion through just your voice. But with PCAP, now you actually have to show the emotion and have it captured so that, it doesn't look like that uncanny valley, right? Where you're just kind of this blank stare mouthing words in the game.
I guess this means I could use more training.
How would you compare? Which would you rather do more of? Let's say this, just straight up VO or PCAP?
Probably PCAP.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you feel it gives a more complete performance?
Yeah, and with that, probably mocap over all of them.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you do it alone? I
No,
realize there's people there, but you don't interact with other actors at the same time.
Yeah. It's for whatever reason, maybe it's the martial arts side of me. I like going the path of most resistance.
Of most resistance. Okay.
I feel like I really enjoy challenges. I enjoy challenging. I feel very accomplished when I'm exhausted. I say this all the time. I'd rather be tired and happy than bored and unhappy. Like be relaxed and have all the time in the world and unhappy. So for me, it's I have a lot of fulfillment, as I told you, in the actual craft of it, and yeah, just getting physically involved and all that. It feels like you really get to own more of the character.
And put more of yourself into the character. And
Exactly.
Time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Justin, you have had an amazing journey thus far. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing it with us. And this was really interesting. I wasn't entirely sure what we were going to learn about you, but I think we've learned that you're really invested in the making of the thing. The result is nice, but you want to make the thing and build that process as much as anything.
You hit it on the nail. I'm a process guy.
You're
Definitely.
a process guy. I can relate to that. I can relate to that pretty well. That's pretty much it for our time, Justin. We went a little bit over, so I appreciate you staying and sharing with us. Thank you so much. This was great. I'm sure when we put this out there, a lot of people will learn some very interesting facts. Who knows? There may be more tattoos. Totally different reasons. But thank you again.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of your day. For everyone listening, thank you for listening. Thanks again to Justin for being here. We do this every month, usually around the same time every month. So we look forward to having you drop in and watch and listen again. Remember, we're on YouTube and on Spotify, so find us wherever you like to find your favorite podcast. Thanks.